Welcome to NVC Life. I'm Rachelle Lamb, veteran NVC trainer and relationship coach, helping listeners navigate interpersonal conflict and ground more deeply into relational living. Greetings, fellow humans, and welcome to episode 20. Yeah, episode 20. I've been at this for 20 weeks now, and I'm glad to say it's a creative process that I'm still enjoying very much. Although I have also found that the amount of time it takes to put together under 15 minutes of audio is enormous. It can take anywhere from 2 hours to 6 hours, which is really surprising to me. Anyway, I'm hoping that will be taking less time as we move into future episodes. But for today, what I wanted to talk about is the expression that we'll often hear in NVC circles and even outside of NVC circles: stop coming from your head. I struggle with this. I'm wanting to find a way to be able to include the brain and the thinking. I think it's a marvelous thing that human beings are able to think. And so let's look at what does that actually mean when someone says stop coming from your head. And what I believe that to mean, and people will have different responses that come to them. But in my experience, what that means is I'm not connecting with you right now. And what would help me to connect would be if you were to come from your heart. Okay. Well, that's also confusing because I think that what happens for people is they think that coming from the mind is you're up there in your head, you're thinking, and it's abstract. Whereas if you come from your heart, I will be able to feel you, and it will be all about nice, warm, fuzzy feelings. That's an oversimplification, of course, but it is often what people have meant when I've worked with them. So to break that down, coming from one's head would indicate, hey, you're up there thinking about things, and coming from one's heart would mean that you're coming from the feeling realm. And these two aspects of ourselves, thinking and feeling, as far as I can tell, they both need to be fully present. That's what I prefer, is to see fully present, because I think if you think about it, if someone is only coming from feeling and there's no thought involved, no thinking involved, no discernment involved, this is not a good sign. And equally, if someone is coming strictly from thinking without the richness of feeling, that's not so good either. I mean, we saw that broken down in a humorous way back in the days of Star Trek. Spock was the figure who was coming from logic, whereas we had Captain Kirk, who was full of feeling and passion. It's not to say that he didn't have any thinking going on, and nor is it to say that Spock didn't have any feeling going on, because the guy actually, from what I could tell, he was a very compassionate guy. So let's find a way to delve a little deeper to find out what is actually happening when we're talking about people not coming from the place of feeling and coming overly or too strongly from head. And I'll say it again. I think that basically what it means is I'm not connecting with you. To accuse someone, however, of coming from their head, I have not found to be overly helpful. In fact, it gets in the way of people connecting. So what could you say instead? If it's your sense that you're not connecting with what the other person is saying, because your evaluation is that they're coming strictly from thinking, and that there is a component missing, the feeling component, you could say something like, sorry for interrupting. I'm struggling to connect with what you're saying right now. And it would really help me if I could get how you're feeling when you're telling me about this. Are you feeling excited about it? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling afraid? Are you feeling defensive? Those are a few possibilities. The thing is, don't be surprised if what you get back is, I'm not going to talk to you about that. Okay? I'm telling you that this da 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 is important to me. Da 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 da. Okay? So just stop it with probing into my feelings in your NVC lingo. Okay, that's useful information, don't you think? It's telling you something. And in fact, if you listen carefully, you can hear the feeling in there. Not all beings are created the same way. Just as you have animals that behave differently in the world. Some creatures are very shy by nature. They don't come running out into your arms. You'll notice that even with your domestic pets, that they have their own way of being. They have their own way of being in relationship with you, of interacting with you. And sometimes we are imposing our own ways of being on other people when we're suggesting to them that they have no feeling. But listen carefully or feel in. You can feel them. This is often a complaint that you'll hear in a couple's relationship, that one person is much more in their head and the other person is much more in the feeling zone. And this can create disconnection between people. It needn't be that way. Typically what it means is that the person who is more into the feeling realm has some work to do around understanding the more nuanced or quieter feelings that a person might have. And that the person who's much more comfortable in the, we'll say, abstract or intellectual zone has a little bit of stretching to do in terms of getting in touch with, not so much getting in touch with feeling. I wouldn't say they're not in touch with it, but they don't express in the same way. So putting it out there a little bit more, making that stretch, and that can be challenging for people. But that's one way to at least recognize that, hey, there are different ways that people inhabit the thinking and the feeling ranges that they have within them. Another thing that I would like to talk about is how coming from one's head might appear to others as being judgmental or being rigid. And rigid is a really good word. I much prefer the word rigid over the word judgmental. Not that I encourage the use of the word rigid as a label, but that it's useful in its description, and that it reveals more, in my opinion, than the word judgmental reveals. The piece around coming from one's head and being judgmental and being rigid. The rigidity is the piece that I would follow closely, because I think what we're really yearning for in order to connect well with a person, whether it's us being rigid or the other person being rigid, is that's a defensiveness that is coming up in that moment, and it's there to protect us. However, it's probably doing more than protecting. It's also interfering with our ability to actually engage and relate more fully with another person. So you want to be able to, disengage that rigidity that comes up. What do you do in the physical realm when we talk about rigidity? And let's use yoga, for instance. So if your muscles are tight, what you're going to want to do is stretch that muscle. Move into a pose that's a little hard for you to hold. Not too much, but just enough so that you can feel some opening in there. Because I think that so often when we're saying another person is judging of us, we're not getting the sense that there's a lot of room to move around what the other person has decided about us. So this is the opportunity for us to learn, maybe how would you address that with the other person if the other person you sense is rigid? That's a bit hard to do, but it's worth you taking the stretch, provided that you have some flexibility and range in the moment, to ask that other person, hey, I'm wondering If you can find any willingness inside of you to stretch beyond what your current assessment of me is right now in this very moment, it's kind of a risk for you to think that I might be different or what you're talking about might be different than what you've decided right now. But curious to know, what's it like for you to hear what I've just said? Always bring curiosity. It's such a hard thing to develop, but so useful, so important, because if we don't develop curiosity, we also bring our own rigidity into the conversation. So do that stretch. Take that downward dog pose. It's always been the classic challenging pose to execute well in yoga. Really feel the tendons and the muscles and the sinews starting to stretch. And we do that in our way of speaking with each other as well. And do not forget the enormous and generous power of curiosity. It was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, "I think at a child's birth, if a mother could ask a fairy godmother to endow it with the most useful gift, that gift should be curiosity." I wholeheartedly agree with Eleanor on that one. I'm going to finish this episode with a piece on listening. This is a really beautiful excerpt from the book The Exquisite Risk: Daring to Live an Authentic Life by author and poet Mark Nepo. In it, you'll hear the delicious openness, the bending towards, the curiosity, the full presence. And here it is. But how do we listen? It is so simple and so hard, so obvious to begin and so elusive to maintain. In this lies the vitality of deep listening, to keep beginning over and over, to keep emptying and opening, and simply to keep listening. For to listen is to continually give up all expectation and to give our attention completely and freshly to what is before us, not really knowing what we will hear or what that will mean. In the practice of our days, to listen is to lean in softly with a willingness to be changed by what we hear. I'm going to say that last line again. It's just so beautiful. In the practice of our days, to listen is to lean in softly with a willingness to be changed by what we hear. And I would say this is the perfect place to conclude today's episode. Thank you for tuning into NVC Life. For future episodes, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. For free resources or to book a private session with me, head over to RachelleLamb.com. Until the next time, stay sane, grateful, and generous.